The Mid-Atlantic ADA Center is part of the ADA National Network. We are one of 10 regional centers providing guidance, training, and materials on the Americans with Disabilities Act. Our number is 1-800-949-4232, and our website is adata.org. Slide 10. Okay, well, I am so excited to introduce Hasan Davis. Hasan entered the school to prison pipeline in elementary school, where his undiagnosed ADHD and dyslexia kept him in transition from hallways to closets to other special places. In his youth, frustrated with the failures of the education systems, Hasan barely stayed one step ahead of the law. After an early arrest as a preteen and later expulsion from an alternative school, Hasan earned his GED and decided to leave the life he knew well for one he could hardly imagine. With the right attitude and supports, Hasan earned his BA in communications from Berea College and his law degree from the University of Kentucky. Hasan has been recognized as a Rockefeller Foundation Next Generation Leadership Fellow, Council of State Governments Henry Toll Fellow, Education Trust Family Fellow, and an Annie Casey Children and Family Fellow. In 2008, Hasan joined the executive leadership team of the Kentucky Department of Juvenile Justice. In 2012, Hasan became Kentucky's 5th Commissioner of Juvenile Justice. Currently, Hasan is an education and justice advocate providing coaching, consulting, technical assistance, and support to youth-serving organizations across the country. He has a deep understanding of how the experience of disabilities in a young person often triggers decisions that cycle youth with disabilities into the deepest corners of our juvenile justice system. In 2016, Hasan published Written Off: How One Man's Journey Through Disability, Poverty, and Delinquency Are Transforming the Juvenile Justice System. And in 2019, he published his first children's book, The Journey of York, the Unsung Hero of the Lewis and Clark Expedition. He lives in Kentucky with his wife and 2 sons. And I am particularly excited to welcome Hasan because he will be addressing the experience of children with disabilities in the broader context of much larger societal issues that we've been talking about a lot lately and that transcend disability. And so with that, I will say very, very happy welcome to you, Hasan.
Thank you so much, Ann, and thanks to Mid-Atlantic ADA for the opportunity to be with all of you today. My name is Hasan Davis. I'm an African-American man. I am wearing a bright fuchsia button-down shirt, glasses, and I have a shaved head with an earring in my left ear. I'm going to do my best to stay calm and focused, which is not always easy for me, so that folks can follow along without a lot of challenge. On the slide that you see in front of the slide that's here, Away from No Way, there's a picture of me as a young man with the sleeveless shirt on, a shark tooth necklace, and bandana, and a picture imposed in front of that with me wearing a suit jacket, tie, and shirt, talking about the difference that a life can have when the right people intervene. There's a logo for my company, HD Solutions, Hasan Davis Solutions, with the words engage, encourage, empower around the words HD Solution. And then there's my website, HasanDavis.com, and my Twitter and Facebook handles at Hasan Davis and HD Solutions. I'm going to start with a spoken word piece that I share sometimes that I think will ground us as we start this conversation. It's called Bebe's Song. Do you remember that song by Bill Withers, Lean on Me? You know how it goes. Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain. We all have sorrow. But if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. Anyway, see, that was the song on the radio the day I got the news. I was at home by myself, had the radio turned up kind of loud, and I guess I was trying to sing, and the phone rang. Hello, I said, when nobody answered. Hello, I said a bit louder, and this voice starts screaming, he's dead. He's dead. They killed Bebe. And the whole world starts to spin, me trying to sit before I fall, this voice echoing through my soul. They killed Bebe. And Billa's on the radio singing, call me when you need a friend. See, Bebe was my cousin, Cedric, about the same age as my youngest brother, Tony, and he was dead. He was the first of my generation to go out like that. Now, he wasn't the last, and he wasn't the youngest. Bebe just got to be first. Bebe was a father at 16, used to run the streets. Well, we all used to run the streets, but he knew how to laugh at himself. And you have to know how to laugh at yourself if you hope to survive those St. Louis streets. So I go home for the funeral. And the boy who killed my cousin is already out of jail. That's when me and mine start talking like it's time to go play, you know. It's time to go play judge. It's time to go play jury. It is time to go play executioner. And that's when it hits me that this is what it's all about. Letting your emotion drive you to the edge of sanity. Holding on so tight, so long to the madness that it eats you from the inside. And it builds and it builds and then blam. You can't help but go off like a loaded gun. And somewhere, another baby sits staring at a door that she don't know will never open again. And somewhere, another mama sits craving a phone that she knows will never ring again. And somewhere, a whole family, a whole community is changed forever again. And that is not how I want to make it to the other side. So I start trying real hard not to let other people push my buttons and make me do things. But sometimes I still get so damn mad, I can't even see straight. And then that song will pop into the back of my head. And sometimes I pick up my phone and I push the little star button. I say, hello, you know, I'm talking to the other side. I say, I miss you, baby. I say, I miss you, Steve-O. God, I miss JoJo. See, Joe was only 14 when they shot him in the head. I say, I miss you, and I will never forget you. And thanks for listening. And I wish that I could return the favor. But I'll talk to you again real soon. So just keep watching my back. Peace. Now, the whole time it's that song, you know. It never stops playing in the back of my head. I'm right up the road, and I'll share your load. If you just call me, call me. See, I remember that song now, because now that's Bebe's song. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Hasan Davis, and just like you, I am a hope dealer. I believe that every one of us has a right to be safe, supported, and provided a clear path to our own personal greatness in education, in career, and across community life. But it's clear that here in America, every person does not receive the same support and guidance that allow them to reach those amazing places. Next slide, please. We're going to have a conversation this afternoon about what happens in the system with young people who face challenges. I want to jump right into it with some data. These data slides are all pretty static. They have a title slides with a splash of blue and just statistics. And I'm going to go through some of these because I want you to roll with me in this conversation as I demonstrate to you how young people are fed into this school to prison pipeline. The first slide says that students with disability are 12% of the student population. And right now, I think it might be more like 14%. This is a few years old. But they comprise about 75% of those students who are physically restrained and immobilized. They comprise 58% of those students who are placed in seclusion or involuntary confinement. They comprise 25% of students who are arrested or referred to law enforcement from schools. So immediately you can start to see that being diagnosed or experiencing a challenge like that immediately targets many of us for tracking into justice systems. Next slide, please. Slide 12. Again, a little more data. And when we talk about race, young people of color, who represent only 18% of the preschool enrollment, are 48% of preschoolers who receive out-of-school suspension. And I have a hard time even getting my head around the idea of a preschooler being removed, suspended from school. White students are 43% of the preschool population, but only 26% of those young people are suspended. We call that disproportionality or relative rate index. It's how we count it in the justice system. The rate that you represent in the general population versus the rate that you represent in pulled out disaggregated statistics. Boys are almost 80%. Boys are 7% of preschool children. 82% of preschool children suspended multiple times, although they only make up 54% of preschool enrollment. Excuse me, I get tongue-tied sometimes. Slide 13, please. And again, I'm going to go through these slides, but you have all of these slides in your handouts. And so please feel free to go back and really digest this, because I think the information that I want you to know if you are a practitioner is that these are the things that you are pushing and fighting against every day. And you knowing and understanding this data arms you to really step in and advocate and support and push against narratives that track many of our young folk. Disproportionately high suspension expulsion rates for youth of color, young people of color, and the data has been the same about this for at least the 30 years that I have been looking at it and trying to use it in my work. Black students, Native American students are in the highest quartiles of young people who are disproportionately removed from institutions. Slide 14. And so suspensions are among the leading indicators of whether a student will drop out. So if you think about the case that I'm building with you, young people who are secluded, removed, isolated, are more likely to be suspended. Suspension is an indicator of dropout. So in 2012, it was reported that 3 million students lost instructional seat time due to school removal. Now that's enough to fill every athletic stadium in the nation at one time. So think about that as a frame. Okay, next slide, please. Slide 15. On slide 15, there talks about the research from Everyone Graduates Center at Johns Hopkins. Suspensions increase the chance of leaving school prior to graduation from 16% to 32%. So it doubles the chance of a young person leaving school early having been suspended. Students who are excluded were 29% more likely to drop out at some point during high school. And the effect of exclusion is it's a multiplier, so it's cumulative. The more times it happens, the higher the increase in the chances of dropping out. Slide 16, please. And this is just a graph that's actually depicting some of those statistics, talking about high school and post-secondary outcomes by 9th grade suspension. Young people who have received suspensions by 9th grade and the chances of them dropping out of school before graduation. And the more suspensions, the more likely that is. Slide 17, please. And I'll try not to just drone on about slides. This is a picture of is a cartoon of a group of young people in cap and gown waiting to receive diplomas, but every other young person is faded out and the words drop out are there. And so talking about the number of kids that don't make it to graduation. Next slide, please. What I know from my own work is that once the experience of high school failure impacts a young person, all the other systems collude to continue to drag that young person further down. This slide just simply says what happens next. Slide 18. On slide 18, there is a picture of a police officer with a man in handcuffs on his knees with his hands behind his back. And the data here says that dropouts are 3.5 times more likely than high school graduates to be arrested. That dropouts are more than 8 times as likely as high school graduates to experience jail or prison, and that they're 63 times more likely to be institutionalized than their high school completing college-going peers. And so again, if you look at the slippery slope that I'm describing for you, those first encounters in education most often, which leave young people isolated, secluded, and separated, lead to suspensions. Suspensions lead to dropout. Dropout very often leads to justice involvement. Slide 20, please. And when we start to look at the justice system itself, the main drivers of the juvenile justice system, the people you find deepest in the system are youth of color, youth experiencing mental, emotional, or physical disability, youth experiencing educational failure, youth experiencing poverty, and youth with a history of trauma. And again, just like with the suspension rates, each of these serves as a cumulative effect. Now, it hurts me when I have to say that being a youth of color is a risk factor for justice involvement. It hurts my head when I have to say out loud that experiencing disability, experiencing the world differently is a risk factor for justice involvement. These are things that are not in the control very often of a young person. They are mutable characteristics. They're parts of who we are, not what we are, but they determine very often the path that we're on. Slide number 21, please. And so in the work that I've done in the justice system over the last 25 years, solid, it's been very clear, but the data backs it up. It's estimated that about 70% of all justice involved youth have disabilities. Next slide. And so as we start to think about the impact that you all are experiencing, the work that you're in, everything about the folks that you are supporting and serving is about resisting the natural flow of this river toward this prison pipeline. Most youth are in contact with the justice system for minor offenses, and that's across the board. But young people with disabilities come into contact with the system for very small reasons, sometimes because their families are screaming for help. But often those small reasons become magnified and exacerbated because the system itself is not designed to support young people in crisis. I don't know how many times I have encountered parents who've told me, I just asked the judge to take them because I thought then somebody could help them. And they wound up deeper in the system, being held in places that they shouldn't be in, experiencing things that they shouldn't experience. And I've heard judges tell me to my face that they sent young people to me because I was the best chance of that kid being safe. And that means we've got a lot of problems in the other systems further upstream, but that's another conversation. Slide 23, please. And so this is a data slide that has lots of words on it that I'm not even going to try to read, but I want it to be here because I want you in your time to be able to go and dissect this information and use it. But I highlighted a piece: disproportionately minority, impoverished, and poorly educated, and many lacking social networks, those are the young and people in the system, limit the type and scope of mental health services provided. Mental health and physical health support in secure facilities are almost non-existent because it's a security risk. That's in quotes I'm doing. But that is the reason that many of the things that we should be demanding, including IEPs and special support for learning, are all things that you can't plan on having access to for a young person who winds up in the system. And so our best bet is to figure out how we navigate around it. And sometimes as advocates, knowing this about the system gives us great arguments to go to the courts, to go to social workers with, in order to prevent them from making a decision that they think is going to be helpful, but might actually be very harmful. Slide 24, please. Again, I just wanted to have more data because who doesn't love data? I mean, I don't love data, but I know it's important because it is the thing that helps us explain to other folks what it is that we see and maybe what we know pretty clearly. But the bottom line is I have not found a positive reason for a young person to move further deeper into justice systems. And that's coming from a person who runs justice systems, but especially a young person who is experiencing other challenges. these systems are not designed for them. In fact, it reacts to them, not responds, reacts to them negatively when they are processing and dealing with things in the way that they do very often, exacerbating a situation and turning small problems into catastrophic problems sometimes. Slide 25. These dramatic and often traumatic experiences threaten to further challenge our youth as they move along their own developmental pathways. The picture here, along with those words, is a picture of a flower growing in concrete. And I think very often I consider that when we think about this population, that they're fighting in places that they're told they're not supposed to be. And sometimes it's just amazing that we're surviving that long to be seen, to be present. Slide 26, please. So I want to shift a little bit and share with you this diagram. On this page is a diagram developed by a woman named Dana Swayze with the Minnesota Department of Juvenile Justice. What she did was take the major theories of development that many of us have studied in school, Kohlberg, Piaget, Havinghurst, all those guys, and then she took the adolescent brain science of the 0 to 25 adolescent brain development, and she developed what I like to refer to as the adolescent brain clock. And quadrant by quadrant, she's identified overlap with all of those developmental theories and the adolescent brain science to show the milestones that a young person has to navigate successfully to matriculate into the next quadrant of development. And if you think about each of these young people as they move, who might experience some trauma, some drama, or some pain, imagine that each time that happens, the clock stops. No matter how good our supports and services are, no matter how quickly we respond to the needs of the family, the child, the community, to get the clock started again, the developmental clock started again, imagine over time that young person might find themselves seconds, minutes, eventually maybe even hours behind their peer cohort. So when they get into the third quadrant of development, which is that 12 to 18 year, where they start to look like adults, but are still responding to the world, maybe out of second, maybe out of first quadrant experiences, development, but the world no longer sees a child who needs support. They see a grown person who needs to be adjusted, who needs to be held accountable. And so our responses change, and that's usually how young folks are drawn off of this support network into this punitive network of justice systems. Next slide. The next few slides are just me breaking down the diagram quadrant by quadrant and enlarging it so that you have the ability to actually look at each of those. Now, I know that since Dana developed this, there have been lots of changes in how we identify and speak about individuals. And so I want to acknowledge that, even as it talks about some of those milestones, because it talks about, what you know about your sex, your sexuality, your gender, and all those things are now much more complicated and comprehensive conversations. But I think it still holds true. You can move through the next few slides, or just the other parts of the quadrant that I want to make sure each of you know are there so that you can go back and really take your time exploring this. One more, please. So mitigating the harm. When I think about the impact of all of the things we've talked about so far, I go back to my core work. Before I was a justice leader, before I was a lawyer, I was an artist, and that was the thing that helped me survive and navigate my challenges. And the work that I do now is really about creating positive, creative engagement environments for folks to experience the world as they navigate it. And so I really think that a strong part of how we engage, it's not just about getting them a good job. It's about creating a community where they feel valued. I have a shirt that says known, loved, and inspired. And those are the things that we should want and be fighting to create for our community. So engaging youth in positive pro-social engagement, creating spaces for them to know each other and to be known, allowing youth opportunities to express themselves with movement, and not just youth. This is young until you're gone. Dance, sports, theater, spoken word, working with your hands, if it's something you like, painting, sculpting, all those things are powerful ways for us to translate our internal expression into external, to let the world see what we are and who we are. and encourage supported engagement with youth and their families. So these are some of the strategies that I use and I train folks on often as a way to keep the conversation moving and keep the energy of moving folks forward into their greater selves. Slide 32, please. So the affective domain, this slide is a colorful slide. It says, welcome to the feeling house. Now, the feeling house is the term that one of my mentors, Dr. Willie Parker, called the affective domain. Now, most of us are familiar with the cognitive domain, Bloom's taxonomy of cognition and all that stuff about, the intellectual processing. But I've always found it interesting that we talk so much about engaging the brain and looking at cognition, but we don't talk about the heart, the affective, the feeling house. And lots of data tells us that if we have not engaged and created human connection and real sense of valuing with people, then we cannot really engage them intellectually and really move them in the place that we want to go. And so reach that heart before we attempt to tap into the head, and then we can engage the hands, right? It's a heart, head, hand conversation. And so the feeling house is important, and it connects with this mitigating work of engagement. Next slide, please. And it takes us right into social emotional learning. And I love the conversation around social emotional learning, but it really is just best practices in human engagement and development that we've finally given a new name to, that folks are attached to stronger than I've seen them attached to many of the ones we've used over the last few years. But social emotional learning, writ large, creates opportunities for individuals to engage, grow, and learn in areas of development, going back to the things that I talked about a couple slides ago, that really get us to awareness of self and other, how to manage our moods in community, being self-motivated toward a goal, having empathy for others, managing relationships, all the things that we want for every member of our community, and sometimes the pieces that are much harder to engage with young people who experience the world differently. So our intentionality about providing spaces to practice, learn, and grow these skills. And by the way, when I was doing this work with workforce and really trying to build relationships between justice and workforce and getting young people out, here's one of the things that really struck me. Whenever I would talk to a CEO or a leader recruiter, they started saying things like, Commissioner, we don't need young people to come to us knowing how to do the thing we do. We can teach anything that we do if they have the ability to manage their mood, to be motivated in the work, to have empathy for their peers and the people around them, to manage relationships in a way that's healthy, to see themselves and value themselves and therefore value their coworkers. You see how this works? Actually, the core skills, they call them soft skills, but there's nothing soft about these skills. But these are the core skills that if we were to create a space for the folk we work with, the folk we are, to really grow these, then their ability to navigate the wider world becomes much easier because it puts them squarely in competition with all the other folk out there. Slide 34, please. So again, talking about social emotional connection, and this is just a big part of my work now, but it's there because it's such a big part of my experience, and my experience informs so much of what I have learned and do now. It's about connecting, finding, encouraging, and seeking, positive pro-social engagement, opportunities to express, supported engagement, interventions. So again, I want to encourage you to come back to slide 34 at your leisure and really look over some of these just as touch points to start to investigate and dig into where you might be able to create and build more supports. Slide 35, please. Ultimately, it's about hope. This slide is a white slide with two circles of fluorescent pastel colors, maybe. Its hope is a seed planted in rocky soil with no knowledge of how deep its roots will sink or how many its fruit will feed. But we must choose to plant and wait and see. Hasan Davis. When I call myself a hope dealer, I mean it in the deepest sense of it. And this is one of the quotes that I use often. This is one of the things that I say often when I'm working with groups who are trying to figure out, what the timeline is. They like to know, when they can expect a return. And it really is about, the investment of hope is an investment in possibility, not certainty. It's the possible that we're really investing in. And that's something that doesn't come to term until it comes to term. Next slide, please. So we all have a story. Again, this is a big blue splash of color with the words, we all have a story. Next slide. On this slide, it says, in the beginning, mine seemed full of possibility. There are 4 pictures here. One of me with my 2 younger siblings. I must have been 8 years old, and they're probably 3 and 4. And we're in our pajamas, and my brother and sister are smiling because they always smile. The second picture is me probably in 3rd or 4th grade in my school picture with a butterfly collar shirt and a polyester suit, looking very dapper, I would have to say. The picture on the left bottom is of my sister and I with my father, and it's an old faded picture that we almost lost when we lost lots of things when I was young. And then the last picture takes up the full right-hand side of your page, is a picture of me being held by my father on my 4th birthday. And I have a blue jet engine in one hand and a red jet engine in the other. And I look at that as one of the single happiest memories of my life. And I have such vivid memories of that moment for lots of reasons. Next slide, please. But even though the beginning, it seemed like my story had lots of opportunity, this slide has an image of a clock, and it says the clock was ticking. It became clear to me at an early age that my story was going to be an everyday fight to be seen and heard, or it was simply going to be nothing at all. And very often, we show up in the world with everyone looking at us with the possibility and all the imagination that they have, and then they start to really see us, and they don't see the passion and the heart. They see all of the challenges, and that's just the way some people in the world are built. Unfortunately, those people usually are the ones that are framing what our story is. Next slide, please. And everyone watching could see that the odds were against me. This is a picture, the same picture of me from when with my brother and sister, but it's just my face with the big circle with a line drawn through it, like a no smoking sign. And then there's a list, a long list on the left-hand side of all the things that I experienced. Growing up with ADHD and dyslexia, it was clear at an early age that I had a severe vision impairment and I was deaf in one ear. I spent most of my time early in school within 3 inches of the chalkboard trying to decipher what the teacher had written. When I was 6 years old, my sister and I woke in the middle of the night to loud screams. And so we rushed out of our bunk beds into the living room. We saw my father throwing my mother against the walls. He threw her onto the couch and jumped on her chest, and he began to choke her to death. My older sister, Teresa, ran for the kitchen, and I followed behind as fast as I could. And when I got there, she had drawn the biggest knife out of the butcher block that she could hold in one hand, and she turned to me and quickly handed me the second largest knife. And at 6 and 7 years old, we had to decide what we were willing to do to protect the person we loved most in the whole world. And we charged back into the living room screaming at the top of our lungs, "You get your hands off my mama." Now, what I know about my father then is that he was not a man that was afraid of much. But maybe when he looked and saw his 2 trembling children and realized what he had become in their eyes, maybe that scared him. He loosened his death grip on my mother's neck, and she took a deep breath and she dove for the phone. That night, I watched my father get escorted away in handcuffs. Shortly after that, they separated. Separation often leads to divorce and things fall apart. We began to move from aunt to cousin to friend, sleeping on couches, on floors, 5 in a bed, wherever we could, as long as we could, until mama finally got us settled in a house, sometimes working 2 or 3 jobs at a time. Somewhere in there, we started to go on and off the food stamp rolls. And back in the day, it wasn't like that cool credit card you get from the government now. You go to Walmart looking like a baller. You got the big packet in the mail at the beginning of each month with the brown dollar bill food stamps and the green $5 bill food stamp and the purple $10 bill food stamp. So you went to buy your food. People knew you were a welfare kid because you bought your food with a coloring book. But mama knew how to make it work. She knew how to get us the things we needed, even if we didn't always get the things we wanted. And sometimes we had to stretch those meals, but we survived. In first grade, it became clear to my teacher very early that this little boy who couldn't sit still, who wouldn't stop touching things that weren't his and looking out the window, who couldn't stop asking questions that had nothing to do with anything in the classroom. The kid who couldn't take lines and make letters, couldn't take letters and make words. He couldn't take words and make sense. She decided that boy did not deserve her precious time. And one day, she grabbed him out of his chair and she drug him across the classroom in front of his classmates. When they got to the back of the room, to the coat room, the closet where they keep all the stuff that nobody uses, she said, "This is your classroom now." And as she turned and walked away, she locked the door behind her and closed it. This became the ritual. Every morning she would drag that boy into the box and explain that it is where he belonged. And every morning he would scream at the coach and punch the walls and sit there. So much so I didn't even think to go home and tell my mama because she was busy trying to keep us all in the same house. And why wouldn't this be the place for a boy whose parents don't love each other, who can't see or hear right, who can't sit still and act right, And so I sat there. Now, my mama always taught me there's 2 things you could do with any situation you find yourself in. Figure out how you got in that situation, she would say, and then figure out how you use it to get what you need. Well, I knew I was here because I was that boy, but I didn't know how to use this. And then one day, after screaming at the walls and punching the coach, I cleared my eyes and I looked up. And I realized that the coat room is where everybody kept their lunch boxes. And all of a sudden, God's plan was revealed, like the heavens opened up. The angels were singing because Susie always had the peanut butter jelly sandwiches without the crust. Bobby always had Tang instant breakfast drink, and Jimmy always had fruit cups. And so for a few days, I ate good. I was coming home saying, "Mama, I'm not even hungry." Until one day, mama started coming to school complaining about their babies coming home hungry. And they came to investigate the mystery of the coat room like a Scooby-Doo episode. And there I was with 8 lunchboxes spread around me like a buffet. And that teacher was so angry and embarrassed that she grabbed that little boy up by the arm and she drug him out of that box across the classroom in front of his peers to that one seat that sits right next to the teacher, and she plopped him down so she could keep an eye on that bad boy who eats other children's food. She did it out of desperation. She did it out of embarrassment, out of concern for her work. But what she accidentally did was restart my clock. And sometimes all we need is a little bit of room and just a glimpse of daylight, and we know there's possibility. So this became my adventure throughout my entire childhood, transitioning from school to school, from home to home. Over my childhood, we lived in 13 different homes. I attended 5 different elementary schools. Some of those homes were rentals for 1 month, where someone would wake you up in the middle of the night, say, "Get up, get your stuff. It's time to go. You'll be in a new school tomorrow." but I always had my family, and that was the thing that grounded me. When I was 11 years old, my friends and I were arrested, and the 5 of us wound up at the police station on a long, long Sunday in rural Atlanta, East Point, which has its own special places. As we were being booked in, and parents were being called and lawyers were being called, there were some altercations with the police there. But then mamas started to show up, and I say mamas because they were all mothers. And as they showed up, they had a whole range of experiences. Most of them were angry or frustrated, and it all came out as this rage. Yeah, I had to take 3 buses to get here. I might lose my job because of you. I got 3 more kids to raise. I'm just going to let them lock you up next time. You know, I'm going to make you go stay with your dad. All this stuff that comes up now as a professional in this work. What I know now is that these families were in crisis, like so many families we encounter. What I also know and have seen is that those of us who are professionals have taken it upon ourselves now to refuse the moment of most critical engagement when families come to us like this. When parents come to you or family members come to you angry and sideways, we say things like, well, I worked too hard for the letters behind my name to be talked to like that. So if you're going to speak to me like that, then we won't even talk. Or you won't disrespect me in my office like that. Now, I understand the right to respect. But I also know that you all, like me, have been trained, and this is the work we were trained for, people in crisis. So why, when people in crisis come to us holding all of their concerns and fear and crisis right in front of us, do sometimes we use that as the moment to push them away and make some false excuse for why we won't deal? This is the moment we were built for. And so I encouraged my staff when I was commissioner to lean into it. This is the moment where you will do your most amazing work. Take a deep breath, let go of your own pride and ego and say, yes, ma'am, I understand that you are concerned for your baby like I am. Let me get you a Coca-Cola and a towel. And then we're going to figure out how we get your baby where they need to be. That's the power we have in this work, to always be that support, to not take any of it personal when they come at us because the rest of the system has failed them in some way. And y'all know what I'm talking about. These systems do fail them in some way. But we ought to be the last one that turns it back because a crisis is hard for us to deal with, or our feelings got hurt. I'm sorry, I'm getting on a tangent, but I want to be clear about that because I think that's important for us to know as we do this work. So at the police station, these mamas all come in, and my mama hadn't shown up yet. And I was like pretty sure that I might not survive the night. So I was thinking of something crazy to say, some way to justify the unjustifiable choices I was making as a young person. But you have to understand that when you have accepted that your life expectancy is probably counted in years on one hand from where you are, then your ability and willingness to do things that a reasonable, conscious person with a long expectation of life wouldn't even imagine. And that's where I was, in that grip. When my mother showed up, she was very calm. I mean, like chill. And I knew I was in trouble. She did all the paperwork, and she actually said thank you to the police officer that she was talking with. And I was like, oh, I might just want to stay here. And so I was like, well, you don't go off in the police station because they might, arrest you. When we get outside, I don't know what I'm going to do. We got outside, I did what I call the near, far, near walk. Y'all know what that is? That's when you walk close up to somebody. People know you're with that person, but you don't walk close enough to them that they can actually reach you if they start to swing all of a sudden. Near, far, near walking. And so I'm walking, watching her at the corner of my eye in case she jumps at me, waiting for her to go off. And she's still calm. So I say, okay, well, you don't go off in the police station parking lot. They call social services, open up a case, get in your business. Well, get in the car. I don't know what I'm going to do. My mother had to borrow a car to come get me because we didn't have one. And I sat down in the front seat, no seatbelt on, hand on the doorknob, because I thought I might have to eject myself physically from the vehicle at a high speed. And we're riding, and I'm kind of eyes down, waiting for her to go off on me, justifiably so. Somewhere in that long ride, I get the courage to look up at her. And she's just bawling. crying these huge silent tears. And she looks down at me and she says, "Baby, if you could see what I see every time that I look at you, then you would know how great you already were." I didn't even know what to do with that. It didn't make any sense considering where we were and the things that led up to it. But I thought if she could look at me with this growing list of, "Oh, no, you don't," that was coming, and still say those words, then maybe I was the one who wasn't paying attention. And so it gave me something to focus on. I wound up on probation for the rest of my childhood. The next year, when I was 12, my mother and my stepfather were both working. So that Christmas, we had what I call the best Christmas ever. I mean, the last few Christmases before, because of our mobility and the challenges we were having with insecurity, we couldn't get a tree. So Mama would take the Christmas lights and she would pin them on the wall in the shape of a tree. And then she would make popcorn, and we would string the popcorn with needle and thread, and we would put the popcorn string around our tree light or light tree. And then my mother would get us to all make gifts for each other, because she told us that this is what rich people do because they don't need anything. They actually make very personalized gifts for each other. And so we thought, yeah, we could do what rich people do. It was a pretty amazing moment. And then we would go downtown to the annual Christmas party for poor children at the Civic Center in downtown Atlanta. And there they would have this ballroom with tables as far as you could see. And there would be food on the tables, and they would give each of us one of those styrofoam trays with the compartments. And they say, you can go up and down as many rows as you want, as many times as you like, and eat as much as you can. And we would, until we could hardly walk. We were so full. Then they would lead us up one by one onto stage, and they would sit us in Santa Claus's lap and take a Polaroid picture. If you remember Polaroids, and they'd hand you that Polaroid picture to keep shaking as you left the stage. And just as you went to leave the stage, a volunteer would hand you a gift wrapped box that said boy 5 to 7 or girl 9 to 12. We would take those gifts home and put them under the light tree with the ones we made for each other. And those were amazing Christmases with the family. But this Christmas, when I was 12, we had a tree so tall that it actually bent over at the ceiling. We had candy and lights and popcorn strung around it. We had giant robots and Monopoly games and puzzles. Everything we saw on Saturday morning cartoon commercials was under the tree. It was amazing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I imagine all the other kids in the world felt. And a few days after Christmas, we went back to school. And after school, there was a knock on my back door, and my neighbor said, "My house is on fire, my house is on fire." And I grabbed my father's fire extinguisher and I ran 3 doors down. His mother was making dinner for her husband, who worked the 3rd shift. The baby started crying, and so she went to check on the baby. And in the few moments that she was gone, the bacon grease caught fire in the pan. That bacon grease fire went straight into the cabinet above the stove, and that cabinet fire went straight into the walls, and that wall fire went straight up into the ceiling and hit all that insulation. And because someone in their infinite wisdom had made the decision that low income Section 8 housing for poor people didn't need to have the luxury of firewalls between each unit, because that's just a waste of people's money. Or because someone decided that some people deserve less than others. 10 families lost everything they owned that day. I stood there and watched as my entire life burned. And by the end of the night, we were homeless again. By early the next morning, I was walking to school in someone else's shoes again. And someone would say, "I remember that sweater. That's the sweater my grandmama gave me for Christmas a couple years ago." And I'd have to swallow down that pain that comes from living in the grace of other people's gifts and offer up a thank you, because I was thankful, but it still hurt. And because Mama didn't want me in my 6th elementary school, she kept me at Brookview, even though the family had to move back into downtown. And then I started a ritual of waking at 4 a.m. every morning to take a bus in the downtown, the second bus back out to Camp Creek, and then walking the last part to school. After I finished my 7th grade school year, my mother enrolled me in alternative school. Now, this was a real alternative school, meaning that it provided each student with what they needed to feel powerful, to be known, loved, and inspired. And Dr. Lorraine Wilson, the administrator there, was the most amazing person that I had ever met. She made me feel great about myself. Now, I always was in some trouble. I wound up living at the school for the rest of my schooling, from 8th grade to my senior year. And I would spend lots of time still challenged by the world, but she did things to make sure I felt like I still belonged. In math class, when it was clear that, up to pre-calculus, she could give an equation and I could give the answer, and most times I would be right. But she told me one day, Hassan, math is not about the answer. It's about the process. Have you all heard that before? Because I hear that sometimes. And I kept saying, well, Lorraine, why do you keep asking me for the answer? And she never had a good response for that. But still, I didn't do well in math because I couldn't process. But one day a week, she would make everyone clear their desk. And then she would start. 3 times 5 plus 3 divided by 2 times 3. Whatever it was, when she stopped, I had the answer. One day a week, she made me math god of the universe, which made it possible for me to sit 4 days a week, not angry and frustrated and lashing out, but just saying, y'all wait till Wednesday. On Wednesday, I get to be the guy. And so she helped me start to figure out how to manage, again, right, some of those social emotional pieces, how to manage myself. She would stop in the middle of class and say, Hassan, do you think you might want to go outside and run around a building as hard as you can, as long as you can? And I'd be like, what? Yes, as a matter of fact, I don't know, but yes, I think that's exactly what I want. And she would let me just go and do it. Now, what I didn't know, and what you all may know about some of the science now, is that you burn off some of that energy, you can actually slow your brain down. The first time I saw one of those nasal congestion commercials where everything is fuzzy and they pull back the edge, the film, like a film on the edge of the TV, and it's got these crystal clear. The first time I saw that commercial, I turned to my wife and said, that's it. She's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I was like, no, that's how it is when I can burn enough energy off to slow my brain down. The whole world gets sharp edges. Dr. Lorraine Wilson taught me how to self-manage by doing things like that really helped me stay connected. And, but it didn't stop me from having challenges. I got called to Dr. Lorraine Wilson's office once. No, I got called to Dr. Lorraine Wilson's office often. But this one time I got called, I had to make sure I get that right. This one time I got called to her office. I was in there waiting for her because I'd gotten in trouble in class. And she came in slow. Now, Dr. Lorraine Wilson had really thick glasses that magnified her eyes. She was legally blind. And so she navigated very slowly and very intentionally. And everything was set in a place and it stayed. And so as she came into the room, I watched her navigate around the desk to her seat and sit right across from me. And I was waiting for the speech that you get if you're the guy that I was. Eventually someone says, I'm just waiting for you to screw up bad enough that I can finally put you out of here without feeling bad about it. That happens. And I'm always like, we can get that done by lunchtime. I know who to curse out. I know who to attack. I can help you out. And so I'm usually, that's usually where things end up for me. But Lorraine sat down and she just looked at me for a while. And then she said, I know who you are. And I was like, oh, wow, here we go. And she continued. And I think that you can accomplish anything you set your mind to. Now, that didn't make sense considering while I was in the office, so I just sat there a second. Then I remembered that Lorraine told me once that she can only see shadow beyond 2 feet. And so I did the lean to see if her eyes would follow me, and she just kept looking forward. So finally I said, Lorraine, it's Hassan, right? And she sat there quiet for a second. And then she said, I know who you are. and I think that you can accomplish anything that you set your mind to. And all you can do, Hassan, is make me a fool for believing such things about you. And for the first time in my educational career, someone told me that I was great and dared me to sacrifice great for something less fulfilling. Now, living at Horizons, I was a student there, boarding. I lived there for 5 years. It was the most amazing experience. For my senior year, just after my 18th birthday, Lorraine called me to her office, and it was right before Christmas break. And I sat in that same seat, and she explained to me that I was about to fail a class that I needed for graduation, and I would not be able to make it up before the end of the year. And she was going to have to ask me to leave my home. I was devastated. But I also believe that sometimes you have to make a change. And so I left. And Dr. Lorraine Wilson actually told my mother about this school, Berea College in Kentucky, that she thought I should apply to. I got my GED. My brother and I, my foster brother Derek and I, he was expelled about the same time from the public school. And so we both got our GED, and we talked about changing the world. But it's not always as easy as talking about it. Next slide, please. As we struggled, here are some pictures of me with my brothers back in the day when we were keeping each other alive on the streets, literally, taking care of each other. I'm the oldest, and I felt a strong responsibility to make sure that they had opportunities, even if I didn't. In fact, my brothers, Tony, Sean, and Derek, are three of the most brilliant people I have ever met in my entire life. I've shook hands with President Obama. I've testified before Congress. I've sat in Fortune 500 boardrooms and talked about what has to happen. And still, these men are some of the most brilliant I ever hope to know. And so going back home, returning to the environment that I had been away from for so long, returned me to a whole other set of challenges. Inside my home, like always, was an amazing, safe place that my mother and stepfather built for us. But outside, the world we had to navigate every day was a crisis. And so we struggled. I eventually went on to college. I wrote a letter to college, Berea College, in August, because classes start in August, and I had not received my acceptance letter. Now, many of you may actually be college graduates, and you may know that if there's you haven't received an acceptance letter from a college by the time that classes start, then there's a good reason for it. But I didn't know that, and so I called the college collect because we were poor, and back in the day you could reverse the charges. And then when the operator accepted the collect call, which I didn't expect, I said, well, I want to speak to the director of admissions. If you're going to go big, go big. And so they put the director of admissions on a collect call from me. And I said, Mr. Cook, hi, my name is Hassan. You don't know me, but I'm in Atlanta, and I applied to come to Berea. And classes start next week, and I haven't received my acceptance letter. And he was kind enough not to start laughing at me right to my face. And he said, give me a second to find your file. And he went digging through the garbage for my file, I imagine. And he came back and said, well, Mr. Davis, I'm going to have to be honest with you. Berea is a selective institution with thousands of applications for hundreds of spots. And I've only got a couple of spaces left, and I've got some very promising applications from a young man in Virginia. So I don't think this is going to work for you. And I said, well, Mr. Cook, I need to know for sure. And he said, okay, I'll call you back and confirm that. And about an hour later, the phone rings, and it's Mr. Cook. And he says, okay, Mr. Davis, I think we're going to give you a chance. I think he seemed like he might be under duress when he said it, but I think we're going to give you a chance. And that quickly, I became a college student. Uh, Lots of drama just getting there. Our car broke down on the way to Kentucky. Bad omens. They didn't have a room for me because I was late getting there. It was all the madness you would imagine. My mother gave me the last $20 in her purse, and she said, "It's time for you to decide, baby, who's right about you and who's wrong. But you have to make a choice." And then she left me.
About 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And she left me to rebuild myself in a world that I didn't have any tools for. Shortly after they left, I finally got into a room about a week later with a roommate, and I would wait for him to go to sleep every night. When I was sure he was asleep, I would get my penmanship pad out. You remember? Solid red line, dotted blue line, solid red line. And I would practice my handwriting like I've been doing my entire life. And after I did that for a while, I would look through my books and figure out which class I had the next day that I might be able to read 4 or 5 pages over and over again for the next couple of hours and absorb enough that I can make an intuitive leap in class to prove I deserve to be here. I walked through every day feeling like an imposter and believing that it was only a matter of time before someone figured me out. I actually made it a year and a half before it finally caught up with me because I didn't ask for supports. I wasn't where I grew up. If you tell people your weakness, they might use it against you. And so I'd learned to keep my challenges to myself and put on a veneer, a front of power that was so strong that people were afraid to approach and challenge me. But that's not how you get to your best self. So eventually I got expelled. I went back home and hit the streets with my brothers, realized that that wasn't going to work for me. So I wrote a letter to my mother from Fort Knox, Kentucky. "Dear Mom, I'm joining the Army. I'll see you when they let me out." That was all I had. I had to make a decision today, so I made a decision. And after I finished my basic training and my advanced training, I went back to Berea and I went to the Dean of Students and I said, "Hi, my name is Hassan and I was a student here, but I want to come back to school." And the dean was nice enough to not laugh in my face and said, "I'm sorry, but I don't think that's going to be possible at this time." And I said, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow." And the next day I showed up at his office and said, "Hi, my name is Hasan Davis. I used to go to school here." He says, "No, you came by yesterday." I said, "Well, yes, sir, I did." He said, "You said you wanted to get back into school." I said, "Yes, sir, I did." He said, "I told you yesterday that that wasn't going to be possible." I said, "Yes, sir, you did." He said, "Well, it's still not possible." And I said, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow." And the next day I showed up and he said, "Mr. Davis, what are you doing here?" And I said, I'm sorry, sir. See, this really is the only thing on my to-do list. So the sooner you let me back into school, the sooner I guess you can do whatever other work you do." And he told me that that wasn't going to be possible. And I called Miss Dean Hager a liar. Now, for context, when I was expelled, I had to meet with him. And he told me that making a transition like I had made, coming through and navigating all the things I had, would be hard for anyone. And sometimes you have to try a few times. And so he said, when you have gotten yourself together and you are ready to come back to this, I'll be ready to support you. Now, what I understand, like you, is that many great counselors say those kind of things to people who are in crisis, but they don't always mean it because they don't expect you to come back. Very few of us are brave enough or unsmart enough to go back to the place of your greatest defeat. No general wants to go back to the battlefield he lost everything on. But I showed back up. And sometimes showing up is all it takes. And so I reminded him of that conversation. So he said, "Okay, I remember that. Let me talk to the committee and I'll see what I can do. And you come back tomorrow." I mean, well, it was already on my calendar, but I'm glad he invited me. It helped. And the next day I came back and he said, "Okay, we've worked it out. Going to be back in the spring. You're going to be on convocation probation, labor probation, social probation, every probation we have, academic probation, but you'll be back in." And so getting back in, I thought I had a new lease. Life was good, but I still was afraid to tell people what I needed. and there weren't people asking me what I needed. And so I pretended and faked it as much as I could, but failed out by the end of that semester. And completely embarrassed and dejected, I walked away again. And I said, I'll be back, and everyone laughed. Oh, no, you won't. So a year later, I showed back up at Dean Hager's office. And I said, hi, you may not remember me. He was like, oh, no, Mr. Davis, we can't do this again. And I said, I just need to talk to the committee. If I can look them in the face and talk to them and they can tell me no, I can accept that. I just need to know that I've done everything in my power to get what I need. And so again, he said, although it's unusual, he would check. And he made an arrangement for me to actually meet with the committee. Now, I went in there and I said, no one's going to look at a school like this that gave a guy like me 3 chances and say what a terrible place that is. See, Berea actually pays all the tuition for every student that comes there, and you have to be poor to be accepted. And so everything about it wasn't me offering to pay $20,000 a year to be a freshman for the next 10 years. I said, but what if I can do this? If I can succeed here, it'll prove everything about your commitment and everything I believe about myself. I said, I just need you to loan me $3,000. Now, looking back on it, that's probably about 20 grand in today's dollars. I need you to loan me $3,000. I figured while they were there, if you don't ask, you never know. There's this new computer that I've heard of called a Mac Plus. It has Microsoft Write 1.1 with spell check. And I'm not even sure what that is, but I'm pretty sure I could finally get what I have in here that I think is so amazing out where you could see it and you could decide for yourself it was worth anything. I just need you to give me one more second chance. And just like that call with Mr. Cook all those years ago, for reasons beyond anybody's guess, they said, okay. I was on every probation plus double secret probation. And they said, if you fail, you have to promise not to come and talk to us anymore, which I thought was fair. And so I was back in school. I asked for help. I got devices, the very first assistive technology available. And I made the dean's list my first semester back. Once I was off probation, I was elected president of the student body. I was voted homecoming king. And at graduation, I gave the opening prayer and welcome from the podium with all the dignitaries as president of the student body. And standing there at the podium to give the opening welcome, I spotted the usher escorting my mother to her seat. And for the first time in my life, I finally saw the man she had been looking at. And in the back of my head, I heard it. If you could see what I see every time I look at you, baby, then you would know how great you already were. Sometimes we need other folk to paint the bright vision of who we could be in the world so that we always have a North Star guiding us in these darkest moments. That is the gift, the opportunity that we create every time we step in to look at the possibility in front of us, not just the present challenge, and encourage the folk that we have the privilege of being connected to reach higher, to push further, to want greater in their own lives. Now, y'all, I could talk here for like the next 37 hours, I'm sure. And we need a little time for Q&A. Can you go to the next slide, please? Let's see what the next slide is. One more slide. Yeah. These are my brothers and me, the experience. What I want you to know as we move into Q&A is that my brothers, I didn't get to talk much about them, but they are brilliant and they're both are challenged in their own ways. And they're both serving life sentences now because there was that point where we had to not just believe we could be more, but then do different to get more. And the system, the world had convinced them that people like us didn't get to be that. And like a lot of the folks that you get to work with, the world is trying to convince them that people like us don't get to be great. And that is such a great disservice. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here and to be with you. And I look forward to spending the next little bit of time taking your questions and figuring out what else we can get into together.
Thank you so much, Hassan. Very amazing, amazing story. We do have some questions for you. I think one of the most frequent questions we get is, you know, I'm only one person in a system, and I believe everything you're saying, and I want to make a difference in these people's lives, or else I wouldn't be here. However, sometimes I feel like I'm doing my job with both hands tied behind my back, and I don't have the support and the money. And then, you know, so I guess I would ask you, what advice do you have for those people who feel, you know, they're just one person in a huge one cog in this big system that seems to be stacked against youth with disabilities, particularly youth of color with disabilities?
Yeah, and I so appreciate that truth and that challenge. And what I usually say is, when they say I'm only one person, I say yes, but you are one person, and your being there means there's one more, maybe just one, but at least one more person that is feeding and seeding possibility that the whole rest of the world isn't. And so I think one is not the loneliest number. It's just the first number. And if you have that investment, other people might see and feed in with you, right? That's that alignment, drawing other people into it. It's hard. I don't want to downplay how difficult it is in systems and processes that don't encourage you to be connected and personally want things to change. But there are people who need it. And so your ability to give that to them, to let them know that you are there for them, makes a difference. It made a difference for me.
Yeah, and I was thinking the same thing too. I think one of the things we see in the special education system, and probably in the juvenile justice system too, is a lot of burnout. So how do you, especially in your experience in, you know, leading a system, counteract the burnout to encourage these compassionate, empathetic, really smart, good people to stay in the field that is tough, is a tough one?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I try to convey is that this work is not penance, right? We are not here to pay penance for some sin. And so we have the idea that we do this work selflessly, I think, is a ridiculous construct of people who want us to sacrifice ourselves. And that's not what this work is about, right? And so this is about feeding in and creating change because it changes us. And being able to see that balance and to be able to accept that, you know, this isn't just about pouring out, because eventually you become empty. I always say that, you know, you have to have hope. You know, hope is mandatory in this work because you can't give what you don't have. So if you've got to a point where you've depleted your own hope reserve, you're no longer any use to the folk you're trying to serve. Right. So finding a break, finding your own other passion, something to go to refill your cup so that you can actually come back and be useful is amazing. I've seen lots of folks, I'm sure you have, and many of you all have, you know, who put it all in until they actually have nothing left, and they're the ones that wander off. They leave even though they could have more to give. I've talked to folks lots of times, you know, and so it's like the safety briefing on the plane. If the oxygen mask comes down, put yours on first, then you'll be in a much better position to help the person next to you. If we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not doing this work. This is not penance. This is not punishment, right? And so we should not treat it like something that we have to endure. This is a place that we ought to be thriving with the people we serve and get the chance to engage with.
Yeah, no, and that excellent point, and it's been encouraging to see more emphasis on self-care and the importance of self-care in our field. So, what is the best way to help youth with disabilities, especially if we're working with younger youth in their early teenage years, to help them understand their strengths and weaknesses that may be in the context of their disability? Because, you know, a lot of times, certainly when I was a teacher, many times they don't want to hear anything about special education or their disability or even that term. And so there's a lot of, and they don't want to be different. It's a time of life where you want to fit in with everybody else and or stand out in a negative way. And so do you have some pointers for professionals to help youth understand themselves better, especially in the early years?
Yeah, and well, my biggest thoughts is just those conversations where we actually ask, you know, what is it that you want, right? And that's a broad question, and you know, most young people start with, oh no, that's like the required first answer. Most adults then go, oh, okay, but that's not the required first response. The next response ought to be, what do you like to do? What kind of things would you like to explore? Let's think about 5 things you like to try, right? So about us being more creative and innovative about the questions, right? And about open-ended questions. Do you want to be successful or not? Is not a good question.
Yeah.
What do you like? Tell me a little bit about one of the best days you've had, right? Tell me about, you know, and, you know, I'm a coach. I do coaching also. And one of the things that I really started to use in my work coaching young people, which I think is also a pretty amazing thing, shifting these high level executive skills to these folks who are in the grip and giving them tools, but asking, you know, there's an exercise I do. I think I just shifted topics like 5 times. I apologize. But there's an exercise that I do and I train on called the bio poem. It's a very simple writing exercise that I've trained all over the country for disability advocates, probation officers, school, you know, whole school districts, you know, but it's a simple exercise I used to use when I was a teaching artist to kind of get to know you with young people. Very simple, unassuming. But as I moved into this work in child welfare education and justice, I started using it as that first introductory tool. 11 lines long, and just ask questions like, what are the 3 relationships you have that are important? You know, what are 3 names that, you know, 3 words that you think people use to describe you? You know, 2 things that you fear or used to fear. So it's a set of questions that I put together, but it's not very aggressive, right? I don't feel like I'm being attacked with someone with a clipboard going, tell me about your life, which is just, you know, but it's a process that we get to start in. We're just going to do a simple writing exercise. If you don't want to write, just tell me what first thing comes to mind. I'll write it down for you, and then we can talk about it. But things like that just give us a wealth of, you know, 3 hopes and dreams you have, right? And so these questions, you know, the most poignant one is 3 things you want people to be able to say about you when you're gone, right? And so all these questions are pulled toward having them to imagine themselves at their greatest, you know, or with their greatest challenges. But it gives me, in a short amount of time, without a whole lot of conflict, it gives me data that I can immediately start to apply as I think about them and the things that they aspire to, and the ways that I might be able to pull in supports to help them. Maybe dance is something I can say, hey, there's this great dance class that they're given free, you know, lessons for, and, you know, let's go down there and see about that. Or, you know, and so our ability to ask questions more abstractly instead of those very type specific questions, like we're on a deadline for something, allows them to lean into believing there's a relationship here. And that really is the biggest piece of this. You know, in my work, that is the thing that I push most, is that this is a relationship, and our ability to build a relationship with them and build trust. Real trust allows us to challenge them and to push them and to ask them to try things that they might not normally try to see if it works. And I always say, and we can always go back to, I don't know, because that's always a good answer, right? So we can try all this. If we go back to, I don't know, then we'll go, yeah, you really did know. That's true, you know?
Okay, we have another question here. Thanking you for opening up and sharing your life story. What can I do to make sure parents get the supports they need for their children in school? So many parents have told me that their districts don't let them know about resources to help them.
Yeah, I think that if you are connected with parent communities that aren't being supported and communicated with, if you have lines in the district, if you have connections in the district that might help navigate that, I think that's amazing. Networking them with other parents that might be experiencing more success, and usually that means parents that might be more affluent and that have figured out how to navigate. And as a connector, you know, there's nothing wrong with asking a family that seems to have children that are similar to this other child who seem to be doing well. Hey, you know, do you all mind? Most often, there's a sense of connection there, right? And if they're not comfortable with it, so can you give me some pointers that I can share, right? Why not be the mediator? If there's some things that I can share, some people that you talk to that you think would be the most useful, right? And so it's about leveraging relationship in so many ways. But I think if we have resources and connections that we can plug them directly into, newsletters or things we can get them connected to that continue to give them information to help them be informed decision makers, I think any of that is useful.
Yeah, you're right. And it really is about connection, even if it's not an official connection.
Right.
And there are parent advocacy training centers, and if you're not being connected to those avenues, seeking them out yourself, but then finding other parents, because connecting with parents is a fabulous resource. Excellent. Okay, one of the things that you talked about was the issue of professionals responding to kids at their worst, or parents at their worst. And so how do you recommend that professionals kind of steel themselves to receive that anger and bitterness so often presented, because we're often the person who ends up getting all of that anger and frustration of years of failure and the system failing their son or daughter or themselves. So I love the idea of using that as an opportunity, and at the same time, I see that it would be hard to receive that and then move forward, which is exactly what we need to do.
And I think the hardest part of it is, again, this is part of that self-care, right? If we are balancing and creating space outside of this grip where we are really getting fed, then we can come into it not needing to be fed. And so I think a part of what I see professionally is that we don't have a separation between these two lives. And so here we're still trying to find the things that feed us and engage us. And so, yeah, being cursed out it's not filling me up. And so part of it is taking care of ourselves better outside, so that when we come in here, we know this is game time. This is the place where I have to show up. And I'm an actor. I have to play a role here, right? And it's critical that I get this role right, that I nail this performance. And so in order for me to get there, I've got to be doing my prep and taking care of myself out here so that I can hold this role. In a lot of ways, I believe that's what it is, right? But it's also the ability, I call it the present and the possible. If we can continue to imagine folk in both places, right? Our present is the grip we're in, but always we're talking and trying to imagine the possible. And our job is to keep showing them that possible and inviting them us to join us there. And so it's kind of a dance that we have to do. But I want to be clear. I'm not saying take abuse. Yeah. Right? That's not the lesson. You're not anybody's whipping board. You don't deserve it any more than those families who have received it all this time. But our ability to actually recognize it for what it is, right? And hopefully we can, by recognizing it, we can actually not take it personal, right? And not take it as a personal attack and be able to take a deep breath. And maybe it's, you know, Mr. Connor, I'm going to need a minute, right? Give me a second and, you know, let me go and, you know, because it's still going to hurt. You know, I've felt the pain myself. And, you know, if I can separate those and recognize it for what it is, then I can diffuse it and not make it a personal thing. And I think that's the biggest part of it. Try not to make it personal. And even if you can't do it in that moment, because you're, you know, give yourself permission to go back and call Mr. Connor up and say, Mr. Connor, I think the other day we came in wanting one thing and we didn't quite get there. But if you are still willing to trust me, I would love to see how we get back on track, right? It takes a lot. And people say, well, I'm not going to swallow but again, this is the work we are here for. If the family isn't thriving, then we aren't actually doing our work. And again, that's just my opinion. That and $5 won't get you Starbucks coffee, but you know, I believe it. I believe it.
Well, and I think you said it's not about pride and your ego, and I think that's a good thing. Well, thank you so much, Hassan. It's a fabulous presentation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, and I'm hoping this is part one of potentially two parts of with Hassan, because you have a lot of wonderful more information to provide us. As I said, we're the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. We're at adainfo.org. Thank you, everybody. And I don't know, Hassan, if you want to say a few parting words. I think we have about a minute left.
I want to say thank you for sure, and I appreciate that this is not the easiest work, but I think it is some of the most important work that we ever get to do. And I appreciate you all leaning into it with the intention of making a difference, not just making it to the end of the day. And that's really important. Thank you all for giving me an opportunity to be with you. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Well, thank you so much. All right, everybody, thank you again for being with us, and keep an eye out of your email. We'll send you the archive of this presentation to for those people who haven't been able or weren't able to stay for the whole thing. And thanks again, Hassan, for your amazing story and such great information. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.